1997 marked a huge departure for the Castlevania franchise, with Koji Igarashi taking the helm and improving on the straightforward gameplay of the classic games in the series and turning it into a much deeper and broader adventure. This came in the form of Symphony of the Night, which is largely considered the best in the series, and one game that has come close to matching the sheer brilliance of it has to be Dawn of Sorrow. It all revolves around our hero Soma Cruz and his plight to put an end to a cult of Dracula's followers who are hell-bent on trying to resurrect their master. When it comes to gameplay, it's a perfect blend of exploration, action and platforming that's set across a huge map that you can explore at your own pace as you slowly unlock new abilities and power-ups, and while doing this you will be fighting against enemies, finding new weapons, armors and accessories, and leveling up thanks to a character growth system based on experience points. Returning from Aria of Sorrow on the Game Boy Advance is the tactical soul system as well, which allows the player to consume the souls of fallen enemies and take on their powers as their own. The more you do so, the more powerful that certain ability becomes, and you can even fuse them together with weapons in order to create even more powerful options for you to deploy. One area where the game will likely turn some players off though is the extreme level of difficulty found throughout the adventure. It's not afraid to challenge you, and this is especially on display during the boss encounters, which will no doubt take a few tries to overcome. Despite this though, when it comes down to it, Dawn of Sorrow is an essential DS game that deserves a spot in every owner's collection. Lunar Nights is the spiritual successor to an often overlooked series of games on the Game Boy Advance known as Boktai. What set them apart from others was a mechanic tied to actual sunlight, which was made possible thanks to a solar sensor built into every cartridge. You would harness the power of the sun and defeat various vampires throughout some incredible adventures, but sadly, due to the games being limited by your real-world environment, they never got the recognition they deserved. Lunar Nights ditches this gimmick and instead opts for a climate system that's entirely determined by the game itself. This time around, you would take up the fight as two different characters: Aaron, a young gunslinger who wields the power of the sun, and Lucian, a mysterious swordsman who fights with the power of darkness. Using the two in tandem is your ticket to victory, with the adventure being split up into various dungeons the player must explore and conquer. As the two heroes hack and blast their way through enemies on the bottom screen, the top screen will display the current weather patterns, which affect the terrain you come across in each and every dungeon. For example, if you can't cross a fallen path, you can make it rain to flood the area and elevate the platform. Or if there's a frozen block hindering the way forward, you can make it sunny and watch it melt before your eyes. This ties into your attacks and movement speed as well, as each will grant an elemental effect to them, such as wind, which adds an extra bite to your hits, or ice that can freeze enemies where they stand. It's a really intuitive mechanic that is much more enjoyable thanks to not having to rely on the real weather outside. All in all, if you can find it for a decent price, then don't hesitate in picking this one up. Rub Rabbits is easily one of the most bizarre games that ever released on the DS, and the premise alone should tell you just how strange the experience is. You take up the part of an average guy who passes the girl of his dreams on the street, and in the hopes of winning her affections, he employs a performance group known as the Rub Rabbits, who teach him several ways to impress her. This comes in the form of several minigames that take advantage of each and every input option the console has to offer. It shares a lot of similarities with the likes of WarioWare, and sees each activity only lasting a few minutes before you're thrown into the next. These range from the humorous to the downright controversial at points, with the player being tasked with having to use the microphone to blow fire, or shouting to get the girl's attention, to using the stylus to provocatively rub her legs, or defeat robotic enemies chasing you downhill. The sheer variety of minigames on offer is what really helps Rub Rabbits excel, and the eccentric nature of the game gives it a distinct charm it can call its own. What really hits home though is the nigh-on mountain of extra content and unlockables that will keep you coming back time and time again. It's a game that keeps on giving and rewards players who go out of their way to achieve the highest scores possible, and with 3 separate difficulty settings to contend with, there's plenty of reason to jump back in once you've run through the story for the first time. All around, this is a really solid game with plenty of imaginative gameplay, an incredible soundtrack, and while the premise may seem a bit out there, once you play it, it'll be extremely hard to put down. Aliens Infestation plays a lot like a Metroid game, where you get to explore the world at your own pace and slowly unlock new items and weapons that open up new areas for you to traverse. At the same time, it masterfully makes use of the Aliens license and takes place after the events of the third movie. As part of the Colonial Marines team, you are sent to investigate a lifeform detected on the US Silico that is aimlessly drifting through space, and in true Aliens fashion, it's not long after your arrival that everything goes south. Now there's a total of 4 options for your main dazzling weapons along with a pistol and various explosives to combat the waves of otherworldly monsters that roam the halls of the ship. Expanding your options are various upgrades that can be applied to each of your weapons, such as the pulse rifle that receives its own stock of grenades, or the flamethrower which gets a huge boost in its effectiveness against the xenomorphs. Combat is a satisfying experience, and killing the xenomorphs is exciting, but they're not the only enemies you'll have to contend with. There are androids, facehuggers, and other soldiers, but it's the several bosses that offer up the more memorable moments in the game. Each of them all have their own patterns of attack which must be carefully observed in order to strike at the right time, with the most difficult being the fight against the alien queen, where you get to use your very own power loader. Now, one aspect that's instantly noticeable about the game are the intricately detailed visuals that sport some impressive sprites as well as backgrounds that depict the various levels of the ship you explore, helping it feel like an authentic take on the franchise. If you're a fan of the movies and are looking to get into a new Metroidvania on the DS, then Aliens Infestation will be right up your street. The DS was home to some of the most memorable platformers of all time, with huge hits like New Super Mario Bros. And Mega Man, but one game that doesn't get the love it deserves is Monster Tale, which no doubt fell into obscurity due to it releasing towards the end of the system's life. It sees the player taking on the part of a young girl known as Ellie, who comes into the possession of a mysterious bracelet that transports her to a faraway land. Once there, she witnesses the birth of a monster she names Chomp, and from that point on, they become inseparable as they explore several kingdoms in the hopes of finding Ellie a way back home. In terms of gameplay, it takes inspiration from the likes of Metroid and presents a vast area to explore, which is made all the easier thanks to Ellie's and Chomp's abilities. You've got your standard jump, but also several combos and rolls which can all be linked together, but it's Chomp which really steals the show, and by having Ellie collect items and food from fallen enemies that he consumes, he'll jump in during a fight and gain valuable experience points. By doing so, Chomp can earn new abilities from gaining levels, and when you hit a certain threshold, you'll be able to branch off and evolve him into different forms. There's nearly 30 of them for you to unlock, naturally all coming along with a range of different effects, which really helps the gameplay stand out. Although it got announced that Monster Tale would be receiving a re-release for the 3DS in 2016, and then again for the Switch in 2021, it would then go dark and seem like the game is doomed to be stuck on the DS, which is a real shame as it's easily one of the most inventive and enjoyable games on the system. Dragon Quest has long been one of the most prolific RPG franchises, with several entries reaching way back to the days of the NES. The 9th game was a bit of a surprise for fans after the huge success of the previous one on the PlayStation 2, as many thought it would continue on that system, but instead Level 5 decided to bring it to the DS, and even though there was some obvious downgrades, there were several features that only made it possible on a handheld, which I'll get into in a bit. As the adventure begins, you get to create a character from scratch who is something known as a Celestian, which is pretty much this game's version of an angel. Without spoiling too much of the story, your hero is basically stripped of their powers and must make their way back home with the help of new friends and strangers along the way. In terms of gameplay, it's your standard Dragon Quest setup, but instead of random encounters occurring as you traverse, enemies are instead depicted on screen, allowing you to avoid them if you wish. Once in battle, it's a turn-based setup where you can choose to attack, heal, buff, defend, and many more options, with character classes playing a huge role in how each of your party members play. But what makes Dragon Quest IX truly unique were the online elements that would later go on to inspire the Street Pass feature on the 3DS. While the DS was in sleep mode, you could interact with others who had the game installed by allowing up to 3 characters to be traded into the game that came along with several items and pieces of equipment for you to use. This feature was really what drew me into the game at the time of its release, and even though it's probably not as important these days, the game itself still offers up an unmissable adventure. Like many of you watching this video, Pokemon was a huge part of my childhood, with Gold and Silver being the ones I played the most whilst growing up. Heart Gold and Soul Silver are essentially remakes, and while the core Pokemon formula remains intact, there are plenty of changes and new additions that help them stand apart from the other games in the series, while still retaining the charm and gameplay mechanics that made the original so popular back in the day. There's new areas to explore, new story beats to unravel, and puzzles to solve that serve to mix up the gameplay instead of solely relying on the RPG mechanics at the root of the series. This was taken even further with the inclusion of a separate device known as the Poke Walker, which allowed you to take one of your Pokemon from the game out into the real world, where you could unlock items and earn points depending on how many steps you'd taken. To be fair, it was nothing more than a gimmick designed to get kids out and about, but it felt fresh for the series, and it's something that both games can call their own. Apart from these new inclusions, the most important and perhaps most impressive was the complete overhaul of the game's visuals, which brought the region of Johto to life like never before. It's all beautifully rendered in a way that easily equals, if not surpasses, other efforts on the DS, conjuring up old locations, characters and Pokemon in a way to make the old seem new again. The world is teeming with life, from the bustling cities to the tranquil heights of Mount Silver, coming together to create a well-defined atmosphere that might just be nostalgia, but for me, no other Pokemon game has come close to the feeling I get when booting this one up. Mario & Luigi Partners in Time is the sequel to Superstar Saga for the Game Boy Advance, and while it kept many aspects of the gameplay intact, it also introduced many new mechanics that took full advantage of the unique input options the DS had to offer. As the title suggests, the story is about time, and we'll see you travelling back and forth from the past to the present, where both baby and older versions of Mario and Luigi decide to team up to defeat a mysterious alien race who have taken over the kingdom, and to ultimately save Princess Peach in the process. What makes Partners in Time different from many of the other RPGs on the handheld is the way both the battling and exploring systems play out. It combines your standard turn-based setup with various reflex-based mechanics you would find in a traditional Mario platformer. Every enemy is different in the way that each has their own special attack that can be dodged by jumping and even as a way to counteract it. For example, some enemies will try to dash at you, and when they just start to run, you can jump over them to dodge the attack, but if you time it correctly, you might jump up and land directly on them, which is like an attack for free. Of course, jumping isn't the only way to hold your own against enemies, as both Mario and Luigi have an extensive range of attacks, such as firepower, hammers, and even special team-up abilities that make short work of even the most daunting opponents. Overall, Partners in Time is a worthy addition to Mario's collection of RPG adventures. It's a light-hearted experience with plenty of laughs, clever game design, and challenging battles that's only let down by its short length and lack of replay value. Dragon Ball is no stranger to the world of video games, with a literal tidal wave of releases across several different platforms, but not many depict the earliest adventures of Goku, and Origins on the DS does exactly that. It follows the events of the original manga and sees Goku meeting up with a bossy, green-haired Bulma as they team up to hunt down 7 infamous Dragon Balls, and when gathered together it allows them to call upon a dragon known as Shenron, who's said to be able to grant a wish to those in possession of the balls. Taking inspiration from Phantom Hourglass, the gameplay is all handled by the stylus, where you must slide it across the screen to move about, tap on enemies to attack, and tap Goku himself to unleash many of his more powerful moves. Now each attack costs ki, which is represented by a yellow bar at the bottom left hand corner of the screen. When it's depleted, Goku won't be able to attack until the bar automatically refills after a few moments of waiting, and this mechanic will no doubt annoy some that play the game, especially those that get a bit trigger happy with special moves, but it really helps the balance of the adventure and forces the player to not solely rely on one specific approach and instead use a combination of movement as well as attacks to be really effective within the world. Now clearly a lot of love and care went into the visuals, which are by far some of the most impressive you'll find on the handheld. Although the DS was no slouch when it came to 3D, Dragon Ball Origins takes it to the next level, with each character, enemy and location all being beautifully realized for the small screen. Origins is easily one of the best action adventures on the DS, especially for fans of the source material, but there's enough here that even newcomers will find plenty to love. Golden Sun was one of my go-to RPGs on the Game Boy Advance, and after a long hiatus, the series eventually made its way to the DS with a completely new adventure that built upon every aspect of the old games, all the while introducing new ideas to help it stand on its own. The story picks up many years after the events of the previous games, with the player taking on the role of several descendants of the prior cast. The main hero, Matthew, embarks on a journey with his friends in the hopes of solving the problem of several rifts that have mysteriously appeared throughout the land and is sucking the elemental energy from the world. I won't spoil too much, but for fans of the originals, there's a nice amount of payoff in the story, so if you haven't played them before jumping into this one, I highly recommend you do. Now on the gameplay front, it's very much a traditional RPG that's divided into an equal amount of exploring and fighting, with each battle revolving around something known as the Djinn. These are elemental creatures that are spread across the world, and once captured and equipped, they can affect and boost your stats, and even change the class of your character entirely, making them front and center when it comes to combat. Now unlike other RPGs where clearing dungeons generally consists of finding a switch or choosing which way to go, Dark Dawn makes use of puzzles in every single dungeon, all of which must be cleared in order to progress. You must use synergy to solve these puzzles, which are special moves that each character possesses depending on their affinity that can range from moving blocks, melting ice and summoning fire, which all have a role to play in overcoming each puzzle that blocks the path forward. Although it doesn't reach the same heights as the previous games, Dark Dawn is still well worth playing, especially for fans of the series. Well, that does it for today's video. Keep an eye out for part 2 as that will be coming up soon, so don't forget to subscribe and hit that bell to get notified about new videos which release every Monday and Thursday. You can follow me on all of the socials which are linked below to stay up to date, and also join my growing community on Discord to meet many like-minded gamers to continue the conversation with. I'd like to give a special shout out to my Patreon supporters, which are all up on screen now, for their continued support that helps make these videos possible. If you're interested in joining my Discord or supporting the channel through Patreon, you'll find all of these links down below. As always, thanks for taking the time to watch the video. I'll catch you next time.